The air was thick with smoke and the distant echoes of destruction. Bonner crouched behind the crumbling remains of a collapsed building, his heart pounding in his chest. Above him, the night sky was ablaze with streaks of red and blue as Hive warships hovered like silent predators, unleashing torrents of plasma fire onto what was left of the city. Each impact sent shockwaves through the ground, rattling Bonner's bones as rubble and dust rained down from above. The distant screams of civilians had long since faded, replaced by the mechanical hum of Hive drones scanning the ruins. Bonner tightened his grip on his rifle, its matte black surface glinting faintly in the flickering light of distant fires. His cloaking suit hummed faintly against his skin, its advanced tech rendering him nearly invisible to both the naked eye and thermal scans. But cloaked or not, he knew the Hive wouldn't stop until they had hunted down every last human. A faint whisper crackled through his earpiece. "Bonner, do you copy? This is Hayes. The others are pinned down 3 blocks north. We need to regroup before the next patrol sweeps through." Bonner pressed a hand to his earpiece. "Copy that. Moving now. Keep low. Those drones are everywhere." He rose from his crouch and darted across the street, his footsteps silent against the debris-strewn pavement. The air smelled of scorched metal and ozone, the bitter scent of war clinging to every breath. Overhead, a drone swept past, its sleek metallic frame gliding through the air with an eerie silence. Bonner froze mid-step, holding his breath as its red sensor lights scanned the rubble below. Seconds dragged into an eternity before the drone drifted away, its search incomplete. Bonner exhaled slowly and continued forward, weaving through shattered vehicles and collapsed walls. His pulse hammered in his ears, each step a delicate balance between speed and silence. The Hive's sensors were advanced, too advanced, but they lacked the one thing humans still had: unpredictability. Bonner reached the rendezvous point, ducking beneath a collapsed overpass, where Hayes and 3 other soldiers crouched among the rubble. Their armor was scorched and battered, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat. Hayes's dark eyes locked onto Bonner's as he approached, her expression grim. "Glad you made it," she said quietly. "We've got a problem. Command center's been compromised. Hive troops are moving in fast." Bonner's stomach clenched. "How long do we have?" "Minutes, maybe less. They're coming from the east. If they take the command center, it's over." Bonner glanced at the others. Jax, the team's heavy weapons specialist, adjusted the charge pack on his shoulder-mounted plasma launcher. Carter, their tech expert, was tapping furiously at a handheld device, trying to hack into the Hive's local comms network. And then there was Diaz, the team's sniper, her rifle cradled against her chest like a lifeline. "We hold them off," Bonner said firmly. "We have to buy command enough time to evac. Hayes, take Diaz and set up a perimeter on the east side. Jax, you're with me. We'll slow them down at the main entrance. Carter, see if you can disrupt their comms. Every second counts." No one hesitated. They had all seen what the Hive did to captured humans. Assimilation into the collective mind, stripped of free will and turned into little more than biological drones. Surrender was not an option. As they moved into position, Bonner's mind raced through the odds. The Hive's soldiers were faster, stronger, and connected by a single consciousness that allowed them to coordinate with terrifying efficiency. But that same connection was their weakness. Disrupt the Overmind's control, and the entire swarm would falter. A distant hum vibrated through the air, growing louder with each passing second. Bonner crouched behind the twisted remains of a transport vehicle, peering through the cracked windshield as shadows moved through the distant rubble. Red eyes gleamed in the darkness. Hive soldiers, their exoskeletons gleaming like polished steel as they advanced in perfect unison. "Contact," Hayes whispered over the comms. "Multiple hostiles, moving fast, engaging." The sharp crack of a sniper rifle echoed through the night, followed by the mechanical screech of a Hive soldier collapsing. Bonner raised his rifle as the swarm surged forward, moving with an eerie synchronization that sent chills down his spine. Jax fired his plasma launcher, a burst of blue energy streaking across the battlefield and detonating against the lead formation. The explosion sent shrapnel and molten debris flying, scattering the approaching troops. Bonner opened fire, his rifle's pulse rounds streaking through the smoke and striking the advancing soldiers. Each shot found its mark, but the Hive kept coming, undeterred by pain or fear. They moved with the relentless precision of a machine, their limbs moving in perfect harmony as they scaled walls and vaulted over debris with unnatural grace. A drone swooped down from above, its red eyes locking onto Bonner as its plasma cannons spun to life. He dove aside as a burst of energy scorched the ground where he had stood moments before. Rolling to his feet, he fired 3 quick shots into the drone's core, watching as it spiraled out of control and exploded against the side of a building. "Bonner, right flank," Jax shouted. Bonner spun just as a Hive soldier lunged toward him, its clawed hands reaching for his throat. He sidestepped and drove the butt of his rifle into its head, then fired point-blank into its chest. The alien collapsed, but 2 more took its place, their eyes glowing with cold, unfeeling purpose. The battlefield erupted into chaos. Plasma fire streaked through the air, lighting up the night with flashes of blue and red. Smoke and dust swirled around Bonner as he fought to keep the swarm at bay, his rifle growing hot in his hands from constant fire. Jax's plasma launcher sent bursts of energy into the approaching troops, each explosion shaking the ground beneath their feet. "We're being overrun," Hayes shouted. "Fall back to the secondary position." Bonner fired 1 last burst before retreating, dodging between crumbling walls as plasma fire rained down around him. Jax followed close behind, his heavy weapon slowing him down as they sprinted through the maze of rubble and collapsed buildings. "Carter, status on those comms," Bonner demanded. "Almost there. Just need." Carter's voice cut off with a sharp gasp, followed by the sound of gunfire and static. "Carter, Carter, respond." Silence. Bonner's throat tightened, but he forced the emotion aside. There was no time to grieve. Not yet. They reached the fallback point, a half-collapsed building overlooking the command center's entrance. Hayes and Diaz were already in position, their rifles trained on the street below as Hive soldiers closed in from all sides. Bonner dropped to 1 knee beside Hayes, taking aim as the first wave appeared through the smoke. "We hold this position," he said through gritted teeth, "no matter what." The Hive advanced without hesitation, their red eyes glowing like distant stars as they closed in. Plasma fire streaked through the air as Bonner and his team returned fire, but the swarm kept coming, relentless and unstoppable. And then, through the chaos, Bonner heard it, the faint crackle of a distant transmission, distorted by static but unmistakable in its urgency. "This is command. Hive forces have breached the outer perimeter. Evacuating essential personnel. Hold the line." The signal cut out, replaced by the low hum of approaching warships. Bonner looked up to see the largest Hive vessel descending toward the command center, its plasma cannons already charging. His heart pounded in his chest as the realization hit him. They were out of time. The Hive wasn't here to capture the command center. They were here to destroy it. Bonner's breath came in ragged gasps as plasma fire scorched the air around him. The Hive soldiers swarmed from every direction, their red eyes glowing through the smoke and rubble. Each shot from their weapons sent shockwaves through the air, shaking the broken remains of the city. Bonner gritted his teeth and fired back, his pulse rifle heating up as its rapid bursts cut through the advancing enemies. But no matter how many fell, more kept coming. "Diaz, cover the left flank," he shouted over the chaos. "On it." Diaz replied, her sniper rifle cracking as she picked off Hive soldiers moving along the rooftops. Each shot sent a soldier tumbling from the heights, but their bodies hit the ground with sickening thuds and lay still only for a moment before twitching and rising again. The Hive's cybernetic implants reanimated their fallen, turning even the dead into weapons. Bonner cursed under his breath. There was no time to waste ammunition on soldiers that wouldn't stay down. They needed to slow the swarm before it overwhelmed them. He glanced toward Jax, whose plasma launcher hummed with power as he prepared another shot. Jax, hit the east corridor. We need to collapse it before they get through. Jax nodded and swung his heavy weapon toward the approaching horde. The plasma launcher fired with a deep, thunderous boom, and the explosion lit up the night like a miniature sun. Debris and smoke filled the air as the corridor crumbled, burying the advancing soldiers beneath tons of rubble. The shockwave sent Bonner stumbling backward, but he quickly regained his footing. Nice shot. Hayes called from her position beside him, her rifle spitting bursts of fire at the remaining soldiers still pouring through the streets. It won't hold them for long, Jax replied, reloading his weapon with quick, practiced movements. Sweat streamed down his face, but his hands were steady. Bonner scanned the battlefield, his mind racing. The main Hive warship loomed above them, its massive cannons glowing ominously as they charged for another strike. The ground beneath his boots vibrated with the ship's low hum, a constant reminder of their impending doom. They had minutes at best before the next orbital bombardment. We need to buy more time for command to evacuate, Bonner shouted. Carter's down, so we can't disrupt their comms. Our only chance is to take out that warship's targeting system before it fires again. How are we supposed to do that? Hayes asked, her eyes wide. That thing's shields are too strong for anything we've got. Bonner's gaze flicked toward the cluster of cloaking devices attached to his belt. The Hive couldn't be outsmarted in direct combat. Their hive mind allowed them to adapt instantly to human tactics. But their reliance on collective consciousness made them vulnerable to unpredictable attacks. If Bonner could get close enough to the warship, he might have a chance. I'll get inside the warship and disable the targeting core, Bonner said, his voice firm despite the fear gnawing at his gut. Are you crazy? Jax snapped. You'll never make it through their defenses alone. I won't be alone. Hayes, you're with me. Jax, Diaz, hold this position as long as you can. If we fail, you're the last line between the Hive and what's left of command. Hayes glanced at Jax and Diaz, hesitation flickering in her eyes before she squared her shoulders, and nodded. Let's do this. Bonner activated his cloaking device, feeling the faint hum of energy ripple across his body as the air around him seemed to shimmer and bend. Hayes did the same, her figure fading into a distorted blur beside him. Together, they slipped through the chaos, weaving between broken vehicles and piles of rubble as the Hive soldiers stormed past, unaware of their presence. The air grew thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning metal as they approached the base of the warship. Its massive hull towered above them, a gleaming fortress of dark alloy bristling with weapon emplacements. Plasma turrets swiveled and fired into the city beyond, tearing through buildings like paper. Bonner kept his eyes on the access hatch near the ship's underside, their only way inside. A patrol of Hive soldiers guarded the hatch, their sleek armor gleaming in the firelight as they scanned the area with cold, mechanical precision. Bonner raised a hand, signaling Hayes to hold position. Moving slowly, he drew a combat knife from his belt, the blade glinting faintly in the dim light. Stealth was their only advantage. Gunfire would alert the entire ship. Bonner crept forward, each step carefully placed to avoid loose debris that might betray his presence. The nearest soldier stood motionless, its red eyes sweeping back and forth in a rhythmic pattern. Bonner waited for the exact moment its gaze shifted away, then lunged. His blade drove deep into the base of the soldier's skull, severing the neural link that connected it to the hive mind. The soldier collapsed without a sound. Hayes moved in tandem, dispatching the second guard with a swift, brutal efficiency. Before the remaining soldiers could react, Bonner and Hayes struck with deadly precision, eliminating the patrol in seconds. Bonner tapped his wrist console, hacking into the hatch's control panel. Sparks flew as the ancient circuitry resisted his commands, but after a tense moment, the hatch slid open with a hiss of pressurized air. Inside, now, Bonner whispered. They slipped into the warship's interior, the air thick with the hum of alien machinery. Dim red lights cast eerie shadows across the walls, illuminating sleek corridors lined with conduits that pulsed with faint blue energy, the neural pathways of the ship itself. Bonner could feel a hive mind all around him, an oppressive presence that seemed to press against his thoughts as if searching for intruders. "Stay close," he whispered. "We can't afford to get separated." Hayes nodded, her eyes scanning every corridor with laser focus. The ship's interior was a maze of twisting passageways, each corridor identical to the last. Bonner relied on his wrist console to guide them, following the faint energy signature of the targeting core buried deep within the ship's heart. The floor vibrated beneath their feet as the warship prepared to fire again, the distant rumble of its plasma cannons growing louder with each step. Time was running out. Bonner rounded a corner and froze as a Hive drone emerged from a side corridor. Its sleek frame bristled with built-in weapons, its red eyes locking onto them instantly. With a metallic screech, it fired twin plasma bolts that scorched the wall beside Bonner's head. "Move," Bonner shouted, diving aside as the drone charged. Hayes fired her rifle, the pulse rounds sparking against the drone's armor with little effect. Bonner rolled to his feet and lunged, slashing his combat knife through the drone's sensory array. Sparks exploded from its head as it staggered, momentarily blinded. Hayes seized the opportunity and fired a burst into its exposed power core. The drone collapsed with a shriek of torn metal. "Come on," Bonner urged, pulling Hayes to her feet. They sprinted down the corridor as alarms blared throughout the ship, the hive mind now fully aware of their presence. Panels slid open along the walls, releasing swarms of smaller drones that skittered after them with terrifying speed. Plasma bolts whizzed past as Bonner and Hayes ducked and weaved through the maze-like corridors, their breath ragged with exertion. Finally, they burst into a circular chamber dominated by a massive cylindrical core that pulsed with blinding blue light. The ship's targeting system. Energy conduits fed into its base, channeling power from the warship's reactors. Bonner didn't hesitate. He drew a high-explosive charge from his belt and slapped it onto the core's surface. The device beeped as its timer began counting down from 60 seconds. "Go! Now!" he shouted, shoving Hayes toward the exit. They sprinted back through the ship as the countdown ticked away in Bonner's mind, the alarms screaming louder with each passing second. Drones swarmed from every corridor, plasma fire scorching the air as Bonner and Hayes fought their way toward the hatch. 30 seconds. Bonner ducked beneath a burst of plasma fire and returned fire, dropping 2 drones in rapid succession. Hayes took down another with a perfectly placed shot to its power core. 15 seconds. They reached the hatch and dove through just as a plasma bolt scorched the air inches from Bonner's back. 10 seconds. Bonner hit the ground rolling, his cloak flickering as he scrambled to his feet and dragged Hayes clear of the ship's underside. The warship's hull shuddered as its targeting core began to overload. 5 seconds. Bonner grabbed Hayes' arm and ran. The world seemed to slow as the countdown reached its final moment. 0. A blinding explosion tore through the warship, engulfing it in a massive fireball that lit up the night sky. Shockwaves rippled through the air, knocking Bonner and Hayes to the ground as debris rained down around them. Bonner coughed, tasting blood and dust, as he pushed himself to his knees. The Hive warship burned above them, its once imposing form now a broken, flaming wreck. "Did we?" Hayes began, her voice ragged with exhaustion. Bonner managed a faint smile despite the pain. "We did it." Smoke and ash clung to the air as Bonner staggered through the rubble-strewn streets, his pulse pounding in his ears. The wreckage of the Hive warship burned behind him, casting flickering shadows against the skeletal remains of shattered buildings. Hayes limped beside him, her face streaked with sweat and grime. The blast had knocked them both off their feet, but somehow they'd survived. For now, the distant hum of approaching Hive drones echoed through the air, a grim reminder that the battle was far from over. Bonner clenched his fists, forcing himself to focus. Destroying the warship had bought humanity precious time, but the Hive's ground forces still swarmed the city, relentless and unyielding, and unless they found a way to sever the hive mind's control, the tide of battle would never turn. "This way," Bonner called, leading Hayes through a maze of collapsed buildings and twisted metal. Their boots crunched against shattered glass and scorched debris as they moved swiftly, keeping low to avoid detection. Plasma fire crackled in the distance, punctuated by the muffled explosions of collapsing structures. The city was dying, piece by piece. As they rounded a corner, a flash of movement caught Bonner's eye. He raised his pulse rifle instinctively, but lowered it just as quickly when he recognized the familiar silhouettes of Jax and Diaz emerging from the smoke. "Bonner," Jax called, relief flashing across his dirt-streaked face. "You're alive." "Barely," Bonner replied, clasping Jax's arm in a brief but firm grip. "Where's the rest of the squad?" "Gone," Diaz said grimly, her sniper rifle resting against her shoulder. "Carter, Simmons, Reyes, all gone. We held the line as long as we could, but there were too many of them." The remaining Hive soldiers faltered for a split second, their synchronized movements disrupted by the Enforcer's fall. Jax and Diaz capitalized on the opening, their weapons blazing as they cut down the remaining soldiers in quick succession. Silence fell over the battlefield, broken only by the distant hum of the Hive's command ship and the crackling of nearby fires. Bonner wiped sweat from his brow, his pulse still hammering in his chest. "We can't keep fighting them like this," he said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Every minute we wait, more of our people die. We need to hit that command ship now." Hayes placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then let's finish this." Jax and Diaz exchanged a glance, then nodded in unison. Despite the odds, despite the fear that weighed heavily in each of their hearts, there was no turning back. Humanity's survival depended on what they did next. Bonner activated his wrist console, pulling up a holographic map of the city. The command ship hovered above what remained of the central district, surrounded by a dense web of automated defenses and Hive patrols. The approach would be treacherous, but with their cloaking devices and the element of surprise, they had a slim chance of slipping through undetected. "This is our shot," Bonner said, looking each of them in the eye. "We get inside, we take out the neural core, and we end this war, no matter what it takes." Jax clapped him on the shoulder with a grim smile. "Let's show these metal bastards what humans are made of." With one final glance toward the distant command ship, Bonner gripped his pulse rifle tightly and set off into the night, his team close behind. The odds were stacked against them, that they carried humanity's last hope, and Bonner would see this mission through, no matter the cost. The night air was heavy with the scent of smoke and scorched metal as Bonner and his team moved silently through the ruined city. Fires still burned in the distance, casting flickering shadows across the shattered buildings and rubble-strewn streets. Every step they took echoed faintly against the broken walls, but none of them spoke. There was no need. Each soldier knew what was at stake. Ahead, the Hive's command ship loomed above the city like a silent predator, its sleek, black hull reflecting the faint glow of distant fires. Bonner's pulse quickened as he stared at the massive vessel, its presence a stark reminder of humanity's desperation. The neural core was inside that ship. If they could destroy it, the Hive's soldiers would become little more than mindless machines. Without their hive mind, they would no longer be able to coordinate their attacks or their defenses. Bonner tapped the control panel on his wrist, activating his cloaking device. The faint shimmer of the energy field wrapped around his body, bending light to render him nearly invisible. One by one, the others followed suit, Hayes, Jax, and Diaz fading into the night like ghosts. "Stay close," Bonner whispered through the comms, his voice little more than a breath. "We only get one shot at this." They moved quickly, weaving through the debris-strewn streets with practiced efficiency. The hum of Hive patrols echoed faintly in the distance, the mechanical whir of drones passing overhead as Bonner led his team toward the perimeter of the command ship's landing zone. Massive plasma cannons and automated turrets lined the area, their targeting systems sweeping the rubble-strewn ground below. Bonner paused behind the skeletal remains of a collapsed building, studying the defenses with narrowed eyes. The cloaking devices would mask their presence from Hive sensors, but a single misstep would still give them away. He glanced at Hayes, who crouched beside him with her pulse rifle at the ready. "We'll move in pairs," Bonner said quietly over the comms. "Hayes, you're with me. Jax Diaz, you circle around to the east and take out those sentry drones. We'll disable the perimeter controls and open a path to the docking bay. No mistakes." "Understood," Jax replied. Without another word, they split up. Bonner and Hayes moved swiftly toward the nearest turret, their cloaking fields flickering faintly as they slipped past a patrol of Hive soldiers. Bonner's heart pounded in his chest as they crept beneath the towering plasma cannon, the faint hum of its power core thrumming through the air. He motioned for Hayes to cover him, then crouched beside the turret's control panel, pulling a compact hacking device from his belt. The device hummed softly as Bonner connected it to the panel, his fingers flying across the holographic interface. Lines of alien code scrolled rapidly across the screen as he bypassed the turret's security protocols, sweat beading on his brow despite the chill night air. The cloaking field flickered briefly as the device drew power from his suit, but Bonner ignored it, focusing solely on the task at hand. Seconds stretched into agonizing eternity as the turret's targeting systems cycled through their scans. Bonner's pulse hammered in his ears as he fought to override the failsafes before the system detected the intrusion. Come on," he muttered under his breath. At last, the screen flashed green, and the turret's power core flickered and went dark. Bonner exhaled sharply, pulling the device free as he stepped back. "One down," he whispered into the comms. "Copy that," Jax replied. "Drones are down. We're moving toward the main gate." "Stay sharp," Bonner said, motioning for Hayes to follow as he moved toward the next turret. The Hive's defenses were sophisticated but predictable. Their reliance on collective thought made them vulnerable to disruption, if Bonner and his team could move fast enough to exploit it. As they approached the second turret, Bonner's comm crackled with static. "Contact, north side." Jax's voice was sharp with urgency. "They got a heavy patrol moving in." The comms cut off with a burst of static. "Jax? Diaz?" Bonner hissed, but there was no response. Hayes glanced at him, her eyes wide with concern. "They're exposed," Bonner said through clenched teeth. "We need to move now." He bypassed the second turret in record time, his movements quick and precise as adrenaline coursed through his veins. The instant the power core went dark, Bonner activated his comms again. "Jax Diaz, report." A burst of static answered him, followed by the distant crack of pulse fire. "Go," Bonner barked, sprinting toward the docking bay with Hayes at his heels. Their cloaking fields shimmered as they moved, their footsteps barely audible against the rubble-strewn ground. The docking bay loomed ahead, an open expanse of scorched pavement surrounded by towering cargo cranes and automated loaders. The command ship's massive landing struts rested on reinforced platforms, cables and conduits snaking across the ground like steel veins. Beyond the landing zone, the ship's main entrance was sealed tight, its thick blast doors guarded by a squad of Hive soldiers. Bonner slowed to a halt behind a stack of supply crates, scanning the area with quick, calculating eyes. The soldiers stood motionless, their red eyes glowing faintly in the darkness as they maintained their silent vigil. Bonner could feel the weight of their collective awareness pressing against his mind, cold, mechanical, and utterly devoid of fear. "They're linked to the neural core," Hayes whispered beside him. "If we take it out, they'll go down with it." Bonner nodded grimly. "We just have to get inside first." He tapped his wrist console, triggering a silent pulse that sent a coded signal to Jax's comm. Moments later, the comms crackled to life. "Bonner, we're clear." Jax's voice was breathless but steady. "Lost our cloaks, but we took out the patrol. Diaz is hit, but she's still moving. Get to the docking bay," Bonner ordered. "We're breaching the main entrance. Double time." "Copy that. Moving now." Bonner turned to Hayes. "Cover me. I'm going for the blast doors." Before she could protest, he sprinted from cover, his cloaking field shimmering faintly as he dashed across the open ground. The Hive soldiers didn't react, unable to perceive the invisible threat moving through their ranks. Bonner skidded to a halt beside the entrance, his fingers flying across the holographic keypad as he accessed the ship's security system. Alarms would trigger the instant he breached the lock, but there was no time for subtlety now. He overrode the main power relay, forcing the doors to unlock with a sharp hiss of escaping air. The moment they began to slide open, the Hive soldiers snapped to attention, their red eyes flaring as they raised their weapons in unison. "Open fire," Hayes shouted. Pulse fire erupted across the landing zone as Jax and Diaz sprinted into view, their weapons blazing as they cut down the nearest soldiers. Hayes picked off targets with precision, her rifle spitting bursts of plasma that sent drones collapsing to the ground in showers of sparks. Bonner ducked inside the command ship just as a barrage of plasma fire scorched the doorway behind him. The airlock sealed shut, cutting off the sounds of battle as Bonner pressed his back against the cold metal wall, his pulse hammering in his chest. He took a steadying breath, then activated his comms. "I'm in. Go." Jax's voice crackled through the static. "We'll hold the entrance as long as we can. Just make sure you finish this." Bonner closed his eyes briefly, then pushed off the wall and sprinted down the corridor, pulse rifle raised and ready. The hum of the Hive's neural systems resonated faintly through the air, guiding him deeper into the heart of the ship. No turning back now. The final mission had begun. Bonner sprinted through the narrow corridor, his boots pounding against the metal floor as alarms blared throughout the Hive ship. Red emergency lights flashed along the walls, casting jagged shadows that flickered like ghosts as he moved. His breath came in short, sharp bursts, but he pushed forward without hesitation. There was no time to slow down. Every second counted. Behind him, the sounds of distant combat echoed faintly through the ship. The sharp cracks of pulse fire, the mechanical whir of Hive drones, and the distant shouts of his team. Bonner clenched his jaw, forcing the noise from his mind. Jax, Hayes, and Diaz were holding the line so he could reach the neural core. He couldn't let their sacrifice be in vain. As Bonner rounded a corner, a squad of Hive soldiers appeared ahead. 6 sleek, insect-like machines with gleaming black armor and glowing red eyes. Their heads swiveled toward him in perfect unison, weapons rising with lethal precision. Bonner didn't hesitate. He dove to the side, rolling into cover as plasma fire scorched the air where he'd stood moments before. The metal wall behind him erupted in a shower of molten sparks, but Bonner was already moving. He popped up from behind a support column and squeezed the trigger of his pulse rifle. Blue energy bolts lanced through the corridor, striking the nearest Hive soldier square in the chest. The machine staggered back, sparks erupting from the smoking hole in its armor. Bonner shifted his aim and fired again, dropping a second soldier before the rest could react. Plasma bolts sizzled past him as the remaining soldiers returned fire. Bonner ducked low, sprinting toward a nearby maintenance hatch as energy blasts scorched the walls around him. The heat singed his uniform, but he didn't slow down. Reaching the hatch, he slammed his palm against the control panel. The door slid open with a hiss, and Bonner dove inside just as plasma fire scorched the air where he'd been standing. The hatch sealed shut behind him, cutting off the sounds of pursuit. Bonner took a moment to catch his breath, his pulse hammering in his ears as he leaned against the cold metal wall. His hands trembled slightly as adrenaline surged through his veins, but he forced himself to focus. He couldn't afford to falter now. The narrow maintenance corridor stretched ahead, dimly lit by flickering emergency lights. Pipes and conduits lined the walls, carrying power and data throughout the ship. The air was thick with the faint hum of alien machinery, a constant reminder that he was deep within enemy territory. Bonner tapped the control panel on his wrist, pulling up a holographic map of the ship's interior. The neural core was just ahead, 2 levels down, in the heart of the ship. If he could reach it, he could disable the Hive's collective consciousness, cutting off their ability to coordinate their attacks. Without the Hive mind, the soldiers outside would be nothing more than mindless drones, easy targets for the remaining human forces. Bonner pushed off the wall and moved quickly down the corridor, his pulse rifle raised and ready. The faint hum of machinery grew louder as he approached a junction, where a vertical shaft led down to the lower levels. The ladder inside the shaft was slick with condensation, but Bonner gripped the rungs tightly as he descended into the depths of the ship. As he reached the bottom of the shaft, a sudden burst of static crackled through his comms. Bonner froze, his heart hammering in his chest as he pressed a hand to his earpiece. "Jax, Hayes, come in." Only static answered him. Bonner's gut twisted with dread, but he forced the thought aside. They knew the risks when they took this mission. All that mattered now was finishing what they started. The corridor ahead opened into a larger chamber, where rows of pulsating conduits lined the walls, carrying energy toward the neural core. The air was thick with the hum of alien technology, and faint arcs of blue electricity danced along the conduits, illuminating the room with an eerie glow. The core was close. Bonner could feel its presence, a faint pressure against his mind like the distant hum of static. Suddenly, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the chamber, heavy, metallic steps that sent vibrations through the floor. Bonner ducked behind a row of conduits, gripping his pulse rifle tightly as he strained to hear. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the faint hum of a cloaking field. Bonner's breath caught in his throat as a Hive assassin stepped into view. Taller and sleeker than the standard soldiers, its black armor adorned with faint red patterns that pulsed like veins of molten metal. Its red eyes scanned the room with cold precision, searching for any sign of intrusion. Bonner held his breath, willing himself to remain perfectly still as the assassin moved past his hiding spot. Its cloaking field shimmered faintly as it moved, bending light around its body like a ripple in the air. Bonner waited until the assassin had passed, then moved swiftly and silently toward the exit at the far end of the chamber. As he approached the doorway, a burst of static crackled through his comms again, this time accompanied by a faint, distorted voice. "Bonner, hold the line. You have to finish this." It was Jax. Bonner's breath caught in his throat. The comms were still unstable, but Jax's voice was enough to push him forward. He sprinted through the doorway and into the corridor beyond, where the neural core chamber lay just ahead. The air grew warmer as he approached, the hum of alien machinery rising to a deafening pitch. At last, Bonner reached the final doorway. The massive metal doors marked with intricate alien symbols that pulsed faintly with red light. He pressed his palm against the control panel, overriding the security protocols with a series of rapid commands. The doors slid open with a deep hiss, revealing the heart of the Hive's command ship. The neural core chamber was a vast, circular space dominated by a massive, pulsating sphere of alien energy suspended in midair. Arcs of blue lightning crackled across its surface, casting jagged shadows against the walls. Transparent conduits snaked from the sphere to the surrounding walls, carrying data and power to every corner of the ship. The air itself seemed to vibrate with raw energy, pressing against Bonner's mind like a distant, unrelenting whisper. Bonner stepped forward, raising his pulse rifle as he approached the core. Its surface pulsed rhythmically, as if aware of his presence. The pressure against his mind grew stronger, a faint echo of countless voices whispering just beyond the edge of perception. Bonner adjusted the settings on his rifle, activating the weapon's high-energy mode. The pulse rifle's barrel glowed faintly as it charged, ready to deliver a burst of concentrated energy that could disable the core in a single shot. He took aim, centering the reticle on the core's pulsating surface. Before he could fire, A sudden pulse of energy erupted from the core, throwing Bonner backward with bone-rattling force. He hit the ground hard, the breath driven from his lungs as his pulse rifle skittered across the floor. Sparks rained from the conduits above as alarms blared throughout the chamber. The air crackled with static as the core's energy output surged, sending waves of heat rolling through the room. Bonner pushed himself to his feet, his body aching from the impact. The core pulsed brighter, its whispers growing louder, as if sensing its own impending destruction. Bonner staggered toward his pulse rifle, reaching out to grasp the weapon just as a shadow moved in the corner of his vision. The Hive assassin lunged from the shadows, its cloaking field shimmering as it attacked with lethal speed. Bonner twisted aside just in time to avoid the energy blade that sliced through the air where his head had been moments before. Sparks erupted from the floor as the blade carved through metal with ease, the air crackling with residual energy. Bonner fired his pulse rifle point-blank, the blue energy bolt striking the assassin's shoulder and sending it stumbling backward. The alien machine hissed in mechanical fury, its red eyes blazing as it raised its blade once more. Bonner fired again and again, forcing the assassin back with each shot as he advanced toward the neural core. The assassin lunged, its blade slashing toward Bonner's chest. Bonner twisted aside, feeling the searing heat of the blade as it sliced through the air beside him. He raised his rifle and fired one final shot, striking the assassin square in the chest. The machine staggered, sparks erupting from its damaged core as its red eyes flickered and dimmed. With a final mechanical hiss, the assassin collapsed to the ground, its blade clattering against the metal floor. Bonner turned back to the neural core, raising his pulse rifle one last time. The sphere pulsed violently, arcs of lightning crackling across its surface as it fought to maintain its connection to the Hive. Bonner took aim, his finger tightening on the trigger. For Jax, for Hayes, for everyone. He fired. The pulse rifle's shot struck the neural core dead center. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The sphere of alien energy convulsed violently, arcs of blue lightning exploding outward and scorching the walls with jagged lines of molten metal. The hum of the Hive's collective consciousness rose to a deafening pitch, a cacophony of countless alien minds crying out in unison as their connection shattered. Bonner braced himself against the shockwave that followed, the force of the core's collapse slamming into him like a tidal wave and knocking him to the ground. The chamber plunged into chaos. Sparks rained from ruptured conduits, and alarms blared in wild discord as the ship's systems spiraled out of control. The floor trembled beneath Bonner's hands as he pushed himself up, his pulse hammering in his chest. Above, the neural core flickered and pulsed erratically, its once coherent energy now a chaotic storm of unstable power. Bonner's ears rang from the blast, but through the noise, he could hear the distant sounds of Hive soldiers collapsing as their connection to the Hive mind vanished. Staggering to his feet, Bonner clutched his rifle and took a shaky breath. His body ached from the fight, but there was no time to rest. The Hive ship was tearing itself apart, and he needed to escape before it became his tomb. Static crackled through his comms, followed by a faint, familiar voice. "Bonner, do you copy? This is Commander Reyes. What's your status?" Bonner pressed a hand to his earpiece, relief flooding through him as he responded. "Neural cores destroyed. Hive's down. But this whole ship's falling apart. I'm heading for the extraction point now." "Copy that. We're moving to intercept. Hold tight, soldier. Earth owes you one." Bonner didn't respond. There was no time. The corridor outside the core chamber was already beginning to collapse, with sections of the ceiling crumbling as the ship's structural integrity failed. Heat and smoke choked the air, and Bonner's footsteps echoed against the trembling metal floor as he sprinted through the maze of hallways. Sparks erupted from shattered conduits, and molten slag dripped from the walls where power lines had ruptured. Ahead, a sudden explosion tore through the corridor, sending debris and fire cascading toward him. Bonner dove aside, feeling the heat of the blast scorch the air behind him as he rolled back to his feet. His pulse rifle clattered against the ground, but he kept moving, sprinting through the haze of smoke and fire. The exit was close. He could see the faint glow of emergency lights guiding the way. As Bonner reached the final corridor, a sudden tremor nearly knocked him off his feet. The ship lurched violently, metal groaning as if the vessel itself was crying out in agony. Bonner pressed forward, his breath ragged and his vision blurred from smoke and exhaustion. Each step felt heavier than the last, but he forced himself to move faster. Bursting into the hangar bay, Bonner's eyes locked onto the sleek silhouette of the human dropship waiting near the far end. Its engines glowed faintly as the crew prepared for emergency departure. The loading ramp was already lowering, its lights cutting through the smoke-choked air like a beacon. Bonner sprinted across the hangar, his boots clanging against the metal floor as debris rained from above. Suddenly, a familiar, bone-chilling hum filled the air, the sound of Hive energy weapons charging. Bonner skidded to a halt, spinning around just in time to see the last surviving Hive assassin emerge from the shadows. Its armor was scorched and damaged, but its red eyes burned with murderous intent. The air shimmered faintly around its cloaking field as it advanced with slow, deliberate steps. Bonner raised his pulse rifle and fired without hesitation. Blue energy bolts lanced through the air, but the assassin moved with inhuman speed, dodging each shot as it closed the distance. Bonner squeezed the trigger until the weapon clicked empty, but the assassin was already upon him. Its energy blade ignited with a sharp hiss, casting a crimson glow across the hangar as it slashed toward Bonner's chest. Bonner ducked low, feeling the heat of the blade pass inches from his skin as he rolled beneath the strike. His pulse rifle clattered to the ground as he came up behind the assassin, drawing his combat knife in one fluid motion. The alien machine whirled around, its blade slicing through the air as Bonner lunged forward. Metal clashed against metal as Bonner's knife struck the assassin's damaged shoulder, sparks erupting from the wound. The assassin hissed in mechanical fury, its blade slicing through Bonner's side as he twisted to avoid a killing blow. Pain shot through his body, but he gritted his teeth and drove the knife deeper into the machine's core. The assassin staggered back, its movements erratic as energy sparked from its damaged systems. Bonner seized the opportunity, driving his shoulder into the machine and forcing it back toward the edge of the hangar platform. For a moment, the two combatants locked eyes, human determination against cold, mechanical fury. With a final surge of strength, Bonner twisted the knife and drove the assassin backward. The machine stumbled, its balance faltering as it teetered on the platform's edge. Sparks cascaded from its damaged core as it toppled into the abyss beyond, vanishing into the depths of the collapsing Hive ship. Bonner staggered back, his chest heaving with ragged breaths as adrenaline and pain surged through his veins. Blood trickled from the gash along his side, but he forced himself to move. The dropship's engines roared to life as the crew prepared for takeoff. Bonner sprinted up the loading ramp, collapsing into the safety of the cargo bay as the hatch sealed shut behind him. The deck trembled beneath his hands as the dropship lifted off, banking sharply as it sped away from the collapsing Hive vessel. Through the viewport, Bonner watched as the massive alien ship began to break apart, its once imposing silhouette now a crumbling wreck consumed by fire and debris. Shockwaves rippled through space as sections of the vessel exploded outward, scattering molten metal and shattered machinery in all directions. Bonner sank against the wall, his pulse hammering in his chest as the adrenaline began to fade. Pain and exhaustion weighed heavily on his body, but he couldn't help but smile through the haze of fatigue. It was over. The Hive's grip on Earth had been broken. Humanity had survived. As the dropship accelerated away from the debris field, Bonner's comms crackled to life once more. Commander Raya's voice echoed through the cockpit, filled with a rare note of pride. "Mission accomplished, Bonner. You did good. Earth is free because of you." Bonner closed his eyes, feeling the weight of countless sacrifices settle upon his shoulders. Jax, Hayes, Dias, Their faces flashed through his mind, each one a reminder of the price humanity had paid for this victory. But their sacrifice had not been in vain. Earth's future had been secured, and humanity had proven that even against impossible odds, they would never back down. As the dropship sped toward Earth, Bonner opened his eyes and gazed out at the distant blue planet. Through the haze of stars and distant nebulae, Earth shone like a beacon of hope, a testament to the unbreakable spirit of the human race. The war was over. Humanity had won.